Hey everyone, welcome to our conversation today about the latest Harvard Caps HarrisX polling. I'm Julia Manchester, national political reporter at The Hill, and I am here with the head of that poll, Mark Penn. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, just to start off with, there is so many moving parts right now in Washington and campaigns. I mean, even as we're speaking, there's so much fluidity in terms of what Biden could do, what he could be called on to do, that kind of a thing. We know he's meeting with House Democrats or House Democrats, excuse me, and Senate Democrats are meeting at the moment, and Biden's preparing for the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. But I think a lot of the curiosity surrounding this poll stems from did the debate performance or his debate performance, which was pretty shaky and rocky, did that have an impact on voters?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think the story right now is the more things change, the more they stay the same. Which is to say that I don't think we're going to see any change. We are getting the rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the one that nobody wanted but everybody got. And the debate itself had a significant impact. It was a scaled event. People always kind of say, oh, somebody with a website who posted something on X has affected the election. No. 50 million people seeing a debate and clips of a debate, that did affect things. It was not just a bad night. It brought down Joe Biden's job performance by 4 points. It moved up about 10 points in terms of people seeing him as too old to serve as president or as presidential candidate, up to I think 74% who now think that. So yes, it was a bad night for Joe Biden. It has clear impacts. Now our horse race didn't change. We had Trump winning 4 before. We had Trump winning 4 after. We had as much as 7 if you add Kennedy and Jill Stein and all the third party candidates. Whether or not they have that effect or not, I'm not so sure. But it is not unusual at all for you to see internals in polls deteriorate before the horse race. That's typical.
Now, why is that? I mean, we saw, like you said, there was an impact on Joe Biden's approval rating and his job performance. But does this mean that while voters may be turned off to Biden's debate performance, they're not necessarily jumping ship to Trump?
Yeah, there. Well, I think they already were in Trump's camp. I think Trump has, in the various polls, been ahead. And in fact, the whole idea to have the debate was obviously an idea to shake up the election, albeit in a different direction, because Trump was winning. Otherwise, no one in their right mind would possibly have a debate unless they thought they were winning. I'm sorry, unless they thought they were losing, and needed something to bring them back, into the ring. So it had already deteriorated against Biden, primarily because of the big issues of inflation and immigration, really, and the fact that the president's job rating had been 44%, now it's 40%, was significantly below water.
I want to get to those issues in a minute, but looking at President Trump's approval ratings, his favorable ratings, were they changed any? Were they in any way changed after the debate, or did they somewhat remain the same?
No, I mean, Trump's rating remained the same. If anything, in this poll, the country got a little bit more sour about the economy, a little bit more sour towards the Democrats, a little bit more sour towards the Republicans. Uh, the voters in the so-called middle still don't like either Trump or Biden. Both are below 50%. Though Trump is slightly higher. If you look at Trump, he is at 46% favorable ratings. However, there's 52% who give him a job approval rating. So they like the job that he did as president about 12 points better than the job that Joe Biden's doing. But they like Donald Trump personally, 46, Joe Biden, 39, 7-point gap in personal favorability, and a 4-point gap in the 1-to-1 horse race. So those are probably the three critical numbers in this. If people were just voting on job performance, it would be 12 point. If
Yeah.
they were voting on personality, it would be 7 point. So they seem to be voting on slightly something else, or this thing is wider than we're getting in the poll results.
We know that voters, a lot of times vote based on their top issues, oftentimes economic issues, jobs, inflation, are driving their decisions. And I want to get your take on those issues, some of the top issues. But one question I have is, over the past 10 days or so, the news cycle has been dominated by this question of President Biden's ability and fitness to serve as president, and also whether he should be on the Democratic ticket at this point. Do you think fitness to serve as president and quite frankly age at this point, is that becoming a top issue for voters, or that should that be put in a different category than your traditional issues like the economy, the border, immigration, etc.?
Yeah, we wouldn't treat fitness for president to be an issue, because it's really about the personality or the ability of each person. I mean, I guess, is Joe Biden too old? And, is Donald Trump, a felon, right? So you have these two competing narratives here, both of which are going hard against the personal reputations and abilities of the individual candidates. So is Joe Biden mentally fit to serve as president of the United States? Or do you have doubts about his fitness? That's 66 have doubts, up from 54. So that's up 12. Do you think Joe Biden is showing he's too old to be president? Or do you think he's showing he's fit to be president? That's 74, up from 63. And do you think Joe Biden's improving as president? 20, getting worse, 54, and 26 staying the same. So on a personal basis, and are these lapses getting more common, et cetera? So on a personal competence basis, Biden is showing obviously significant increased weakness, but Donald Trump also has weaknesses, and those weaknesses, do you think Trump's conviction means he is a felon? 47% say felon. 53% say it was a political trial. And is he a threat to democracy? 50 say no, 50 say yes. So the Democratic arguments here have certainly roughed up Trump. And so part of what you get here is when 74% think that Biden's too old doesn't matter, it seems to be far beyond any group of people who are going to actually vote or not vote, because at least 80% are just going to vote their party, no matter who the candidate is. And they're kind of showing that now. Look, when I worked with President Clinton against Bob Dole, the polls, we got those polls into double digits, although the actual race was much closer, and our internal polls were precisely correct. A lot of the external polls had 10, 15, even 17 points gap. Remember that you don't see anything like that here. You have 6 points here before leaners, I think, 4 points after I put leaners in, because a lot of the leaners are sort of soft Biden voters here who are kind of wondering, can they go through with it? And that's because there is so much division within the country that seems to be relatively hard and fast. The idea that we'd see double-digit differences in the polling seems almost impossible because of that.
You just read some of the findings on voter views on the conviction, whether it will impact them. But it's interesting, and I want to pick your brain just as a veteran of politics. Over the past 10 days or so, as Joe Biden has had arguably the worst news cycle of his presidency, you have Democrats trying to flip the script in a way on Donald Trump, talking about how the mistruths he spoke at the debate, calling him a liar, talking about this Project 2025, talking about him being a convicted felon. I'm just curious, how do Democrats, I mean, is it possible for them to effectively counter message in this news cycle right now?
No, not really. Yeah. I mean, obviously, if you go to, I mean, you can stand on any street corner or, whatever barbecue you had over the 4th of July. There's no question that people were chattering about Joe Biden. What did he say? Do you think he can do it? What's going to happen with Vice President Harris? I mean, this was a huge national conversation being held out there, what I call at scale, meaning it can have real impact. And Trump generally played it smart. He's been under the radar screen. He did not step on the story. Even any comments he's given have, for the most part, been measured, and consequently, I think the this is not right now an election about Donald Trump. It's an election about Joe Biden. And like I said before, when you have deteriorating internals like this, the horse race here could end up, over time being wider unless Joe Biden comes up with a formula for countering it, or unless the Democratic convention hits it out of the park. But the Republican convention will shortly be coming first.
Right, right. One figure that has really come to the forefront lately over the past 10 days is Vice President Kamala Harris. And you hear more chatter among Democrats, some that say that in the case that Joe Biden steps down, she should get the nomination. She should be that heir apparent. What do her approvals look like? I know that Republicans for quite some time have campaigned on this message of a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris, and have used her sort of, as this attack point. What do voters have to say about her according to your findings?
Well, Harris has about, look, there's an administration, and it's the Biden-Harris administration. So her numbers are about the same as Joe Biden's. Biden was at 39% favorable. She's at 38. Biden was at 55% unfavorable. She was at 52. He was negative for 16. When you subtract one from the other, she's negative 14. Hillary Clinton is 36-53. Those three figures are all pretty close. So would she be better? I mean, the conversation would be somewhat different. Nobody will be talking about age.
Right.
They'll be talking about other things. But do I see her stepping in here and making a fundamental difference given her ratings? No, but let me just say that one thing Democrats have proven is that Democrats are a party of vice presidents. Hubert Humphrey, Walter Mondale, Al Gore, Joe Biden. So if it's not, there's an unwritten rule that vice presidents get the choice. So I kind of think that it's pretty clear that if he steps down, the only thing that would not create chaos is really a pretty quick closing around Harris. But I don't really think, I think the president's been clear. He's not going anywhere. Yeah. You can't get me to go anywhere. Absent God telling me to go somewhere, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And I suspect today he's making that clear to members of the House and Senate. And what are they going to do but go along with it?
Right, right. Definitely. It seems like we're seeing more numbers like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, someone who's disagreed with the president on a number of generational issues. She's even falling in line behind him. One figure we haven't talked about is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It was interesting. Last week, there's been this negative news cycle about Biden, people noticing Trump staying quiet. But RFK Jr., it's been a little quiet for him, except for that, many would call a damning Vanity Fair article. There was a picture of him, with what appeared to be the carcass of a dog, and sexual misconduct allegations. He was very much in the press trying to push back on that. But what are voters thinking about him at this point? Because it seems like the RFK front amid this Biden news cycle has been a little quiet.
Well, they actually like him a little bit more. He's at 40% favorable, 38% unfavorable. So he's got a +2. So I think they like him a little bit more than people realize, but he's not really at this point running a credible race. He wasn't in the debate. I don't think he's gaining traction. Could he possibly be a place where frustrated Biden voters go, that might jump up? Maybe, but he hasn't had. I mean, well, you may be reading Vanity Fair. It's not exactly, earth shaker out there.
Right.
So I think if anything, this could have been kind of a quiet barbecue summer. Kind of politics was kind of winding down for a while, and people returning to their individual lives. But it's all about Joe Biden. I mean, I actually am stunned. Like, I don't know if you can beat this topic, you know, to death the way it's been being talked about and mulled over and microanalyzed.
Yeah, and there's no indication that it's going to go away. I mean, this seems to be something that the campaign and the White House just need to buckle up for. You talked about frustrated Biden voters, and I've been out on the trail and I've chatted with voters. More so, they call themselves independent swing voters. That oftentimes voters lean one way or the other. But do you get a sense that there's a frustration with the choices we've been given between President Biden and President Trump? And what do you think? What do you think these frustrated independent voters who wish it was two other people? What do they ultimately do? I mean, I guess we neither of us have a crystal ball, but it seems that these voters feel like they've in a way been cheated, even though the process has been fair, but out of more attractive candidates.
Well, look, about 60% of the country really didn't want this choice. However, that was Republicans who didn't want Biden and Democrats that didn't want Trump. And so about, more than half to two-thirds of each party wanted these choices. And so that's how we wound up here. And of course, there was my wife runs No Labels, and there was a fierce effort to make sure that there were no independent candidates. And I think the Democrats may be even regretting now they didn't allow a normal primary process to happen, because that spawned Kennedy going as an independent and Dean Phillips just sort of becoming frustrated. But that might have served the party and the country better to have a normal primary process where candidates and presidents kind of get out there, as opposed to what happened here with the debate. So I think we're just going to have to see what happens here.
Right, right. One thing we're really keeping an eye out for is Trump's sweepstakes and who he chooses. It seems that he's really narrowed this down to Senator Marco Rubio, Senator J.D. Vance, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. I know that the poll often features polling for other figures outside of presidential figures, foreign figures, etc. But do you have any insight into which way Republican voters, or maybe voters in general, who they would like Trump to choose?
Well, the truth is, when we ask them, none of the VP choices are so well known that they jump out as, oh, that's definitely clearly it. Because when we ask the voters, Ron DeSantis actually is usually slightly on top of the list,
Yeah.
as a potential choice. But even that is with like 10, 13%. So there's the voters don't have a clear choice here. I think it's a very interesting choice. I think Rubio is certainly interesting to have a Latino on the ticket would probably, I think, serve to Trump's advantage. I don't, it's definitely Ohio is out of play anyway.
Right.
Vance would be seen as a more conservative choice. We will, and I think Burgum is basically unknown by the country, but has a generally good record, and so I don't think he's got it. Those three of the choices, probably Vance, or everyone thinks has got the inside track, but probably does him less benefit than the other choices because it ties into the votes that he already has. Burgum is seen as somebody with a lot of gubernatorial and administrative experience that could shore up that element of it. None of these are wacky choices that are, you know, from the far extremes of the Republican Party in Congress or something. There's no Sarah Palin type choice here.
Right, right. Yeah, no, it's been interesting to hear some of the parallels, pointed out between Doug Burgum and Mike Pence. Obviously, two very different kinds of conservatives, but both governors of, relatively rural states. So that's been interesting. Mark, I want to get your take on foreign policy and what the poll showed in terms of foreign policy. Just down the street from me in DC, the 75th anniversary commemorations of NATO are happening. Leaders are traveling to DC. President Biden will be meeting with them. He will hold a press conference on Thursday. Ukraine, top of mind for many of these leaders, many people at the summit. How are Americans looking at these foreign policy issues and what's most important to them?
Yeah, mostly they're not.
Okay.
It's it's a lot of people follow some of this and they read it, have information about it. But when we ask them the most important issue, Israel-Hamas conflict is the most important issue for 2%. Ukraine, not at all. So I don't think you should overestimate how focused the voters are on inflation, the direction of the economy, their own lives. Those things dominate. When you then look at what they do think about foreign policy, I think we didn't poll all of it in this particular poll, but they do think that it's important for NATO countries to pay their fair share. I think Trump has a reasonable issue there. They are favorable overall to NATO. They're kind of sour on Ukraine funding. They oppose the $60 billion. Actually, if it went to a national vote, they remain sympathetic to Israel. They would have supported the Israel funding. They don't like to fund anybody, but it was kind of 54 to, we got there was a high don't know, but it was a solid majority in favor of the Israel funding and a majority against the Ukraine funding. But they support the Ukraine and they support Israel. When we ask them Israel or Hamas, it's 80-20. Difference by generation. Old people are 95-5. Young people now seem to be closer to 60-40 Israel. Most people think Hamas got to go. So there's and the change we've seen in that is zero. We've seen Biden's ratings on Israel continually go down. The more that actually seen, the more he appeared to tip his hat to the left on the issue, the more his ratings really plummeted.
Right.
It's one of his lowest ratings now. But then part of it too is, he didn't solve any of these conflicts. And so they really want a president to to not only be involved and not only fund things, but to somehow bring them to resolution. That's when numbers really soar. But as President Clinton showed, you can even win an international war and then lose the presidency a short period of time later because Americans are really super focused on domestic policy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Finally, Mark, on this note about the Israel-Hamas war, I think there's been a lot of questions as to how, and I know that only 2% of Americans put that at the top of their list in terms of priorities, but in the swing state of Michigan, also Minnesota, I think there's been a lot of questions as to how this is going to impact progressive turnout for Democrats. Do you have any insight as to whether this is going to be a deciding factor or could be a deciding factor in those states?
Well, I think he's made a mistake playing to that. I try to explain in the math of elections that if an election's 5-5 and someone changes their mind, it goes 6-4. If someone stays home, it only goes 5-4. So a switcher that is a swing voter that goes from one to the other is worth 2 times whether someone stays home or not. And all of the swing voters here want a stronger president, would have backed stronger actions against Hamas and recovery of any hostages. And so he didn't have a Democratic primary. And whether or not some voters stayed home or not would be easily overcome by a stronger showing with swing voters. So I don't know that if people were playing politics here, I'm not sure they played the politics particularly well, and they were scared into the notion. Democratic interest groups have a great way of getting the consultants to go into the candidates and say, if you don't do this, you're going to lose, and Donald Trump is going to be president, and and that's usually exaggerated for ideological reasons. And so he started in a place where he had pretty broad support for his policy, and by wavering and seeming weak and not as strong against not taking hostages, he did not do himself any good. And I don't see any evidence that that's going to have. Now, to go back to your question, is that really going to have an impact either way? These people in these demonstrations are not waving American flags. How many of them were really voters in the first place? The percentage of people who cast these non-committed voters was really small. And in the end, are they really going to welcome Donald Trump in as a protest? Not very realistic compared to our swing voters going to defect because they see that a weakness will require even more spending on the defense budget when their priorities are really national as opposed to international.
Well, there's so much to look out for between now and election day. We have the RNC next month, the DNC, or this month, the DNC in August. So I think that a lot could happen between now and the election. Mark Penn, as always, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Jared.